in the fog-choked hills of Harpers Ferry, where the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers crash together like the past and present, a somber relic stands watch John Brown's fort. This squat, weathered building once echoed with gunfire and defiance during the infamous 1859 raid that shook a divided nation. It was here that John Brown made his last, desperate stand, a stand that would end in blood, death, and execution. But not all who entered walked away untouched. Locals whisper of footsteps echoing when no one's inside, of ghostly figures pacing behind barred windows, and of voices urgent, angry, unfinished. As the sun fades and the mists rise from the rivers, the air thickens with more than history. You're not just walking into a Civil War site. You're stepping into a story still being told by shadows. The walls of the fort hold history like bone holds marrow. Civil War buffs, school groups, and paranormal investigators all walk its narrow halls. Some hear the whispers, some feel the chill. But few know the truth, not all who died there rest in peace. Local ranger Eli Carter tells of cold spots that hover over one corner, and how even modern lights dim inside the structure. Every October, he says, something changes. It's like the air thickens. You feel watched. He's not the only one. Tourists often report seeing a tall man in a long brown coat, standing silently inside the fort, back turned to them. He stares toward the barred windows. When approached, he fades into the wall. "I thought it was part of the museum," one visitor wrote in a Yelp review, "until he turned to look at me and his face was half gone." The town chalks it up to imagination. But rangers like Eli keep quiet for a reason. They know something else happened during Brown's raid, something erased from polite history. Of the 21 men who followed John Brown into Harpers Ferry that fateful October night, most met grim ends, executed, gunned down, or imprisoned. Yet one name lingers like a ghost in the margins of history: Jeremiah Jed Greene, a young black abolitionist from New York whose fate was crueler than most and almost entirely forgotten. Jed wasn't given the dignity of a trial. According to shadowy accounts passed down through generations, he was captured by angry townsfolk, dragged into the very firehouse where Brown made his last stand, and chained in a corner cell. There, over several nights, he was beaten, mercilessly punished not just for rebellion, but for daring to raise his voice as a free black man in a slave state. Then, one night, the beating stopped. Jed was gone. No burial, no death record, just silence. The mayor reportedly sneered. He was one of the madmen's gang. He got what he deserved. And the town moved on, at least. They tried to. But the firehouse kept its secrets. Visitors speak of anguished cries echoing after dark, chains rattling without cause, and the cold brush of unseen hands. A shadowy figure, tall, lean, with sorrow in his stance, is sometimes seen staring from the corners, vanishing when approached. Jed's name never made the textbooks, but perhaps it was never meant to. Perhaps his spirit remained behind, not in anger, but in protest, waiting for someone to hear his story. Because vengeance, they say, never stays buried, and justice never forgets. In the decades following the Civil War, Harpers Ferry tried to move on. The town rebuilt. The fort became a landmark. But something within those walls refused to be forgotten. Locals began to report unsettling sounds echoing from John Brown's fort, anguished cries that didn't match the fiery rhetoric of Brown's famous last stand. Instead, they were tortured pleas. No more pain. Let me die right. I stood for freedom. These weren't the declarations of a proud martyr. They were the desperate cries of a soul denied dignity, suffering long after death. In 1922, a night watchman named Elias Crawford abandoned his post mid-shift. He later claimed he saw a burned, chained figure dragging itself across the firehouse floor. The figure whispered, "They lied," before vanishing into the stone. Crawford quit that night and never returned to Harpers Ferry. Paranormal events at the fort didn't stop. Mysterious flickers, blue and green lights like wind-blown candles began appearing regularly after dusk. Paranormal investigators took notice. In 2006, a group led by psychic Linda Keene conducted a midnight investigation. What they captured was chilling. Cameras malfunctioned. Batteries drained with no explanation. Then, Keene froze mid-sentence, entered a trance, and began speaking in a deep, male voice. "They say I was nobody, but I burned for you all." Moments later, she collapsed. Rushed to the hospital, she remained unconscious for 3 days. The investigation's full footage was never released, but a leaked audio clip caught something else, a whisper not from Keene, but a separate voice murmuring, "He still walks. Not Brown. Him." To this day, visitors and staff alike report the lights, the voices, and the presence, not of the famous abolitionist, but of someone lost in his shadow, still waiting to be seen. Tour guides at Harpers Ferry proudly recount the tale of John Brown, the radical abolitionist, the man who dared to challenge a nation's conscience. His final speech, his trial, his gallows moment, all etched into the annals of American history. But while Brown's legend is preserved in stone and sermon, the fort may harbor a different spirit. A quieter, more tormented soul. Not the famous martyr. The forgotten one. Jed Greene, a young black abolitionist, courageous enough to join Brown's cause, yet erased from the pages of history. Captured alive during the raid, Jed was never granted a trial. Local lore says he was chained in the firehouse basement, beaten until he died. No grave, no name on a plaque, no justice. Yet some say his presence remains. Witnesses describe a gaunt, shadowy figure pacing the fort's stone floor, shackled and whispering. A tattered coat, a broken chain dragging behind him. These details mirror a rare 1859 newspaper sketch and letters referencing Jed's capture. The entity doesn't proclaim revolution like Brown. He doesn't want remembrance. He demands justice. In 1971, journalist Martha Delaney volunteered to spend a night in John Brown's fort for a Halloween feature. Armed with a sleeping bag, a thermos of coffee, and a handheld tape recorder, she expected cheap thrills. What she got was pure terror. At exactly 2:17 a.m., her recorder picked up chains scraping across the stone, a labored breath, and 3 chilling words. "You forgot me." By sunrise, Martha was found curled in a fetal position just outside the fort, barefoot, her shoes missing, her notes torn. Her hair had gone noticeably gray. She never published the story and quit journalism a week later. Today, her tape faint, crackling, disturbing still circulates among ghost hunters. Jed hasn't been forgotten. Not entirely. Locals whisper warnings. If you stay in John Brown's fort past midnight, especially on October 16th, the night the raid began, you might see the Shadow Man. Tall, thin, chained. But whatever you do, don't speak to him. And above all, don't say the name John Brown. Because the spirit, they say, hates that name. Not because of betrayal, but because it's a reminder of who was remembered and who was erased. Brown became a legend. Jed Greene became a ghost. And ghosts don't forget. Today, a modest plaque inside the fort mentions Brown and his men. But Jed Greene's name is still absent. His grave remains unmarked. No monument, no portrait, just fading stories passed from old locals to curious visitors. Yet his spirit, it seems, remains half seen, half heard, but fully present. Every year, more reports surface. A locked door that suddenly won't open. Phones that glitch with static and strange whispers, recordings that, when played back, include muffled crying or a faint voice begging, "Let me be remembered." And then there was the child. 7 years old, on a school trip. Quiet, thoughtful. As the group exited the fort, she paused, turned back to the dark corner near the old cell, and whispered to no one in particular. "Why is that man crying?" No one else saw him. But she did. And maybe that's all Jed wants for someone, anyone, to finally see him. Not as a ghost, but as a man who stood for freedom and was forgotten by history. A retired ranger, now on his deathbed, confessed in 2001 to seeing Jed's name scratched into the wall behind the exhibit panel. "He tried to leave a mark," he said. "We painted over it." The fort has since been restored. But still, every October the air thickens, the flickering begins, and somewhere in the shadows a man with no name waits, asking, "Will you finally remember me?" If you felt the chill of Harpers Ferry's haunted past, like this video and share it with fellow ghost story lovers. Don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying tales from America's darkest corners. Your support keeps these forgotten spirits and their stories alive. What haunted place should we explore next?